Hey, y'all, it's Michelle with SLP Full Disclosure. Today, we have a very special guest, and I know I say that about all of my guests, but Jana, you are very special. It is going to be a very unique podcast, and I was just talking to the producer before we started, and I don't think that we've ever had a parent on the podcast before to get a parent's perspective, and I don't think we've ever had an individual who's been through speech therapy. So the purpose of the podcast today, typically, Jana, we're talking about things like, how to better our toolkit, and working in speech therapy and all of the different strategies and all of the things that are out there to help us become better speech therapists. And I know that you and I have been friends for about 25 years
Yeah.
now.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we are joined by Jana White from Birmingham, Alabama. And our relationship began when I started working with her daughter, Mary, who we are also going to be hearing from later on, in early intervention. And I know that as a speech pathologist, our relationship is very unique, and we don't typically get to see the children that we work with in early intervention go through elementary school and middle school and high school, and now in Mary's case, college. And we don't get to see that progression, and we don't get to see the fruits of our labor. So that's why I wanted to have Jana on today, and why we're going to be having Mary on here in just a little while. But Jana, gosh, thank you so much for joining us
You're
today.
welcome. You're welcome.
So let me give you guys a little bit of background on my friend, Miss Jana White. Jana graduated from the University of Arkansas with a Bachelor of Science degree in radio television with an emphasis in marketing and public relations. She has previously worked as a business development consultant, senior marketing specialist, account specialist, and traffic coordinator for a variety of news stations in Alabama, North Carolina, and Texas. Jana is currently the founder and president of Creative Directions, a marketing and public relations firm that specializes in nonprofit organizations. Since its inception in 2006, Creative Directions handles all aspects of traditional media, including broadcast, cable, outdoor, print, and radio. And one thing that she did not put on her bio, her most important job of all, Mary's mom. So Mary's mom, I'm sure you're like me and you get known as Mary's mom everywhere you go because
Right.
she,
And I do have two other children, by the way. One of their,
yes,
one birthday is today. Mary has two older brothers. So
yes. Oh my gosh. So
also
Mary,
Ben's mom and Jake's mom.
Ben's mom and Jake's mom, exactly. So mom is the most important job of all. So Jana, thank you again so much for joining us today.
Of
So I
course.
just wanted to talk about Mary's story, your journey through working with all of these different disciplines and how it started. So I know I sent you an outline, and the very first question, how proud are you of Mary and all of her accomplishments in life?
Well, I mean, extremely. I get comments on a weekly, sometimes daily basis. Just before we started, I got a text that said, Mary hasn't even heard this one yet. Someone went to her work today from United Ability, some type of I don't know why they have to do that, but she said, Mary is one of the most remarkable people she's ever met. And I get that very often. I've had people who say, like when she was in high school, I had a bad day, but Mary walked past my room and she recognized that I needed a hug. She's that
Right,
person that knows when I needed a hug and when I need her to leave me alone too.
right.
She's got really good, her social skills. She was actually tested, neuropsychologically tested. And, we have issues with the IQ, of course, and that's
Right.
why she was in special ed, but she's socially gifted. I mean,
Oh,
which
I
doesn't
can
surprise
definitely,
me. We'll go
yes,
to a fundraiser and she can work the room like any adult. She just goes around,
absolutely.
talks. It's not like she hangs on to me and needs to be with mom. She does her own thing. So she's
And the thing about Mary, too, is not only is she so socially adaptable, but she can talk to anybody. She can
Mhm.
talk to little kids, she can talk to her peers, and she can talk to adults. And I know that she has had speaking engagements with congressmen and
Mhm.
governors and people in really high authorities. And she knows how to handle herself and carry on those conversations and get her voice heard. I
Right.
just love it. It's amazing.
It
So,
is.
Jana, we're going to go back to the very beginning because I really want the speech pathologists that are listening today. I talk about this a lot with the SLPs that I have been a mentor for, especially when they're working in early intervention. Um, in that birth to 3 age group, these families have gotten these diagnoses, which is why we're in. And a lot of times in that 3-year period, these families are still grieving. So let's go back to the very beginning. Did you know that Mary was going to have medical needs before she was born?
When she was 19 weeks old in utero, I had the ultrasound to find out if she was a boy or girl.
Hmm.
And I had 2 boys, so I obviously was thrilled when I found out it was a girl. But the doctor said, "There's some little thing on her brain I'm a little concerned about." He said, "It's not a big deal. Don't worry about it, but let's just go get it checked out." So it really came across as no big deal. But I
Right.
went to UAB to the special, I don't know, the high risk
Hmm.
OBGYNs.
Yeah.
And those folks don't have the bedside manner that your typical OBGYN does. They're a very different breed,
Yeah.
and you don't see the same one. We had multiple visits there, and they originally diagnosed her with something called Dandy Walker, which is what she ended up not having. But they said basically, if she doesn't develop hydrocephalus, this is a find we may have never known, so it may be fine. Well, then at 26 weeks, she developed hydrocephalus.
Hmm.
And that's when the news got bad. And, I did what every parent does. And keep in mind, she's 25. So this was 25 years ago. There really weren't we didn't have Facebook or Instagram. So the groups
Google.
that you had, there were different groups. So I did find a support group online. But the people that are online are either the ones who are newly diagnosed, like we were, or the ones who have the most severe issues and need that support all the time. So I was talking to parents, because a lot of the friends who have what Mary have had are nonverbal and are
Right.
in wheelchairs. And it just depends on the level of, severity and how much because there was brain damage between 26 and 20 and 36 weeks in utero. And we knew this, but
Right.
I think now they can do some surgery in utero, but at the time they had done a few, but they said there was too big of a risk of losing her. So,
Right.
we didn't go that route. But yeah, so those 10 weeks, really from the 19th week of my pregnancy till she was born, but especially those last 10 weeks, there's grieving involved, but there's also, a lot of the unknown. The things that I found were that she may never walk, may never talk. And that's what the doctor said. I think they want to give you worst case scenario. And,
Right.
so you're prepared for the worst, but you hope for the best, but you're prepared for the worst. But
Right.
that was really, really difficult. But I did go meet with a neurosurgeon. I knew that she was going to have brain surgery on her very first day of life. And I
I was
knew,
just about to ask
Mhm.
about the prognosis
Yeah,
and when she had her first surgery. So
yeah,
the
her surgery
prognosis
was
was
one day.
not
Yeah, her
good.
prognosis was not good. When she was born, we had two, but it was really good that we knew in advance because I have
Mhm.
friends who don't know until the baby's born that there's issues.
Right.
Um, because sometimes these things hide until the very end. Just like
Right.
Mary's really didn't, you don't typically get, or at least I don't know now, but the ultrasounds we got towards the end were not the ones that you might typically get
Yeah.
um, to know that there's something wrong. But we had met with a neurosurgeon, met with a nurse, knew what a shot was, knew that she was going to have brain surgery. So, and we're really prepared for the worst.
Right.
And
And so you guys had that already planned ahead of time. So that was the benefit of knowing when she was still in utero that she had hydrocephalus
Mhm.
and that she was going to need that shunt almost immediately upon arrival.
Right.
And so you guys were already able to have that scheduled.
Right, and we also had 2 sets of doctors and nurses in the room when she was born, because she was born by C-section. There was a team of a doctor and team of nurses for me, but then there was also neonatal doctor, I guess, the specialist was in the room so a doctor and then 2 nurses for her.
Right.
So, the nurses that were taking care of me and the doctor didn't have to, you know,
Take care of her
they
too.
took Mary and they put her away, as soon as she was done, she came out, they were working on her.
How quickly did she have that first brain surgery?
One day. So
One.
she was born on a Wednesday and she had the surgery Thursday morning.
Wow.
Yeah. So one day.
Oh, that's a lot because
And
all of the new moms out there, I know you guys know that it's overwhelming enough to have a baby and put your body through that, but then knowing that your baby is going right into brain surgery, that had to have
Right.
been terrifying.
Right.
Wow. So I think the takeaway from that I want all of our speech pathologists to kind of keep in the back of your mind as we move forward in this podcast and then we meet Mary here in a little bit is that the prognosis was not good. And you're right, Jenna. You hope for the best, but you prepare for the worst.
Hmm.
Um,
And there's
but
also, I will say, sometimes I've seen this with new parents too, and I know I went through it. There's a lot of anger that takes place too.
Oh, I'm sure.
And I don't know how to describe that. And I don't know if Mary's even ever heard me say that, but you do get just mad for some reason. I mean, there's just this whole like, why me? Why my child? This isn't fair. You have those kind of thoughts I think are very normal. But then once she arrived, those thoughts kind of went out the door. And it was like, she's here. We love her. Let's do what we've got to do. Then you get your game face on.
Yeah, she was a gift from God, and she was given to you for a reason and
Mhm.
given to your family for a reason.
Mhm.
And look at the impact that you've had on so many lives because of your story. And hopefully today this story reaches a lot of other people. But I want speech pathologists to know that, we're getting these kids in early intervention and we don't know what the prognosis is going to be. And when
Mhm.
I first started working with Mary, I mean, she had a lot of challenges,
Mhm.
physical challenges, gross motor challenges, the whole gamut across the board. But just wait. You guys just wait. You've got a treat coming here in a little bit. So she gets through the surgery. When did you start early intervention? I'm sure pretty quickly. I know the answer to this, but just so our listeners know,
She was 6 weeks old when we
6 weeks.
start. At least I can't remember, Michelle, if we did speech that early, but I know that
No.
we did physical therapy.
Right.
Really surprised me. One of my neighbors, Melissa White, was a
Yes.
physical therapist and a friend. And I remember I used to think, you work at UCP, that must be so depressing to see
Yeah.
those poor kids every day. And I thought, oh, and she goes, no, it's a great place. I love it there. And it's so
Yeah.
full of joy and happiness. I was like, really? But then once I was there, I was like, oh, I get it now. Yeah,
Hmm.
I see it. It's like until you're in that world, when you're looking from the outside, it's very different than when you're on the inside.
When you're on the inside. So
Mhm.
speaking of that, did you have any experience other than just, I know Melissa, she and I are really good friends and I worked with her. I was on her team. Did you have any experience in that field and
No,
medical fields? Because
no.
not only are you inundated with now at 6 weeks old with, you know, a all these therapies coming into your home, but you're also navigating that medical field. And we didn't have Google. I know people don't know that, but Google has not always been around. So how do you how do you navigate for people like you and I, Jana? How do you navigate that? How did you learn and how did you reach those support groups? Was that just through the medical teams at the hospital saying, "Hey,
Actually,
here's the family"?
it helped having my neighbor. That's
Okay.
why I ended up at UCP actually. But my doctor, I had a really good pediatrician, and
Mhm.
he said we needed to start early intervention as soon as we could. I think 6 weeks is the earliest you can do it.
I think so.
Um, and we looked at a couple other options. There's the Exceptional Foundation, and they didn't have anything available. And I was really, it just worked out how it was supposed to.
Yeah.
But there were so many things through early intervention that I always say I wish Mary had been my oldest because it would have helped me parent my other two. Because I
Yeah.
learned parenting skills through early intervention that every parent should know. It
Yeah.
doesn't
Oh,
matter if your child has an issue, you
that
know?
makes me so happy because early intervention, I agree with you 100%. It is so beneficial for everybody. I wish that every child could
I do
receive,
too. Well, and for
phys
the parents too. I mean, it's just I thought,
mhm.
I've got 2 kids already. I know
I've
this
been there,
I
done
know
that.
this drill, but it's very different, and
Very
it
different.
was very helpful.
Mhm. Speaking of having older kids, how did Ben and Jake how old were they when Mary was born? I know they're much
They
older than
were
her.
5 and 2 when she was born.
2 and 5. So, how did they respond to their new baby sister that they had been planning for and preparing for that's now coming home with hydrocephalus and has had to have brain surgery? How do you explain that? And that's something that a lot of times we miss as speech pathologists. We're so focused on the child that we're working with that we're not thinking about there's other family members, there are other kids in the home.
Well, I
How
will
did
say, I don't know if you remember as much, but Jake and Ben came along a lot, or they
they
would be
did?
there when we had therapy. So,
Yeah.
I think you and Melissa and the other like, the OT,
Mhm.
they all encouraged us to include because I said, "Oh, whenever we figured out what time, because we're working around nap schedules and feeding times, and so when do we do therapy?" And I said, "I need to work around when the boys aren't here." And I remember Melissa saying, "No, include the boys. Let them be part of the early intervention." So they would help. It's like, "Go get this toy," and they would teach
Mhm.
us things with the toys that we had at our house,
Mhm.
not necessarily just the special things that you have when you go into at the time
Mhm.
it was UCP.
We call
Um,
that the bagless model. We don't come in with toys. We use what the kids have in their home
and they
because
did.
I know where you came from. I know what your background is like, but not all families live like you guys do, and they don't have the resources that you guys did. So we use what the kids have in their home. And I think one of the podcasts I talked about, you can play with a wooden spoon and a plastic bucket. You don't have to have a fancy toy.
No, you don't. And I remember the first therapy that we did were Mardi Gras beads,
Hmm.
and we would put just a little dangly toy on it, whatever. It could be just like a little teething toy and put it right in front of her, dangle it over her.
Hmm.
And they said that just keeping her eyes centered was a big
Yeah.
thing on keeping her brain, so
Right.
there were so many little things. But I think two of the most profound things that happened with that type of thing with early intervention was her taking a bath, because she still took a bath with her brother.
Hmm.
Well, she wanted to sit up, but she couldn't. She didn't sit up till she was 6 months old. She didn't stand until she was a year old. So taking a bath for a wiggly, wet baby who's playing and wants to have fun when they can't sit up in a bath seat, because I would put her in a bath seat and she'd, sloop
Slump
in.
over.
Yeah. So I would have to just lay her on her back and do really shallow water, and I'd have to do a bath by herself. Somebody at UCP, I guess it was the OT, came and found that it was a lending library, and they
Hmm.
lent me a bath seat that had like a little seat opening, and her
Hmm.
legs went through, and it had a higher back, and it came from Walmart. I mean, this was not
Right.
some specially designed. It's just one that they had found that worked, and I used it for 6 months or so, then
Yeah.
gave it back, and I'm sure another family used it. But then, and just a side note, her brother was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes when he was 2.
I remember
So
that.
Mary was 9 months old. Ben was 2.5. And he had to be on a very regimented schedule of
Hmm.
eating, and he didn't want to eat. That's one thing they can control.
Yeah.
And so I had to put him in a high chair. Well, Mary couldn't, but again, she would slump down the high chair. So trying to feed 3 children at one
Right.
time and without a high chair for Mary. So the occupational therapist came to the house. We found an old baby seat that was a car seat of some sort, put it on the table. And again, nothing fancy. She said, what you got in your drawers? And we just got dish towels, rolled them
Hmm.
up and put them next to her head, and was able to position her head so I could feed her. So it
Yeah.
was amazing. Yeah.
So again, just the magic tricks of all of the special therapies in their bag of tricks coming into your
And
home
it's simple
and
things, but I
using
will
the
tell you, I
yeah,
mean, even as I consider myself a fairly intelligent person, but some of those simple things you go, why didn't I think of that?
why
Well,
didn't I
I
think
wasn't
of that?
trained for that. You guys are. And that's why
Right.
what you bring to the table is so important to moms who
Right.
need it.
And I think I came on board with Mary. Typically, speech comes in 15 to 18 months. And she
Mhm.
was probably somewhere between 12 and 18 months when I came on board, working on those basic communication skills. Um, when you look back at that time in early intervention, did you have an end goal in mind? We talked about this on the podcast before, like when you're planning ahead for kids who have needs, who may have medical needs, who may have intellectual needs, who have physical needs. Do you plan with the end in mind, or do you go day by day and just say, okay, if we can learn, like you were talking about, she couldn't sit up. So if she could sit up, that's going to help bath time, that's going to help feeding. If she could walk, it's going to help this and that. So do you go day by day as a parent, or are you really looking with the end in mind?
I tried really hard not to go to the end yet,
Okay.
because, you'd lay in bed. I mean, I would lay in bed and think, what's it going to be like when they're
Mhm.
this age and this age? And what's it going to look like when she's out of the house? And,
Right.
or, when she's an adult, and those things were scary, and it's like, I
Mhm.
just put them out of my head. I really did. I tried to
Yeah.
compartmentalize and just go, okay, how do we get to, when she was little, it was, how do we get to preschool? Then from
Right.
preschool, how do we get to elementary
To
school?
clear school.
My goal
Right.
for her to go to elementary school was to be potty trained. And she
Right.
potty trained really late, but she did it. And so
Yeah.
when she went to kindergarten, she was completely potty trained. But so the
Right.
goals were different than they were with the boys. But
Right.
they were, and then, once you get to elementary school, then there's getting to
You're
middle school,
really
so we just kept the
yeah.
process was, I try to look at the most immediate goal.
Oh, I like that. I
Mhm.
love that. What's gonna help make my life easier and her life more productive right
Mhm.
here and now. I love
Mhm.
that. And
Well, and
just
I was,
setting those short-term goals and meeting them. We set a goal to learn to sit up, we did it. We set a goal, learn to walk, we did it. We set a goal to learn to walk and talk, and we did it. So just moving through those developmental phases and not looking too far into the future was beneficial for your family. So you've now been through early intervention. We've done the birth to 3. Now it's time to transition to preschool. So you've had one set of therapists, OT, PT, and speech working with you in early intervention coming into your home. Now we're transitioning to preschool. And I know that Mary went to Hand in Hand because that is where she and my daughter met and were in the same classroom. Mia and Mary were friends when they were, I think Mia started there when she was about 15 months old. And I think Mary was already in that classroom. Was it the Sunshine Classroom? Is that where they
I
were?
don't remember, but I
Yeah,
did read Butterfly Room at one
Butterfly
point.
was the room and then the Sunshine Classroom. But that's where my daughter Mia and Mary became lifelong friends and buddies. So what was that transition? We're going to talk about those different transitions as we move through. So what was that transition like from early intervention therapy to that preschool
Well,
therapy?
you
Because
you
with
may not be aware of this, but we tried the public school route first. So at 3 years old,
I think I do remember. I do vaguely remember that.
my kids were in a church Mom's Day Out program at like 9 to 1 or something like that. I don't remember the exact times. And so, since one of my other children were already there, the other son was already in kindergarten, but Ben was still there. And I thought, well, this will be easy. I'll take them both. And we were doing like 3 days a week or something. And then she went from we were doing that plus the public school. Well, this
Mhm.
didn't last long because the one thing I loved, the public school teacher said, Mary, you know how to open your juice box. Do it yourself. Get your crayons out yourself. Because they were loving her too much at the Mother's Day Out because it wasn't a
Mm.
trained, they were
They
just
weren't.
sweet little moms that were taking care of babies. And they
Right.
didn't know that. So they would try to do too much for
They
her.
were coddling her and they weren't pushing her to learn new things and get frustrated and learn how to work through those things. Yeah.
And that's when I decided I really wanted to get in full time at Hand in Hand. And so Mary was already going to Hand in Hand like
Mhm.
2 or 3 days a week. And so I was doing 2 days here, 3 days there. I was doing both the Mother's Day Out and Hand in Hand at one point. But then I just asked if we could, and I got on a waiting list and finally got in. So we
Mhm.
eventually got in full time at Hand in Hand.
So, for those of you listening, Hand in Hand, and I've spoken about this program before, and I think all of the listeners know how I feel about inclusive preschool settings. I think that they are the most magnificent thing that is out there for typical and atypical children. In your experience and in Mary's experience, what was that inclusive preschool setting like? What did that do for her?
Well, I just think it helped her, be like everybody else.
Mhm.
And the kids were very, it didn't matter if you were in a wheelchair or if you had a walker, which Mary did, or if you had braces on her legs, which she did. All the kids were they were all just kids. And when you
Yeah.
learn from such an early age, it's like when you think about racism, people aren't born racist. They learn that behavior. And I
Right.
found like when Mary had a walker, one time we were at a playground and outside of school, and she left her walker at the bottom of the slide, and this little girl walked up to use it to play with it, and I looked at her. I said, "It's fine." And Mary was on the play set, and this mom ran up and screamed at her child, scared her to death, scared all of us to death. Don't touch that! Don't touch that! Like it's contagious. Like if you touch it.
Right.
So then it made Mary go, "Why is she screaming at
Yeah.
her touching? There's nothing wrong with that." And then it made that child afraid of a person with special needs.
With a disability, someone
Mhm.
who was different. And I think that, I don't think, I know for a fact that that is where Mia learned empathy
Mhm.
and she learned to accept people for their differences because Mary did use a walker. She had kids in her classroom who were in wheelchairs. Um, Mary was learning to talk and her speech wasn't as clear as some of her other friends. Some of her friends couldn't talk at all. They were nonverbal. So to Mia, Mary didn't have a disability. Mary was just Mary.
Exactly. Exactly. And my boys, I would say the same thing because they did include them so much, even at the facility, that
Mhm.
they were able to be exposed to a
Yeah.
lot of, different people.
And I think for speech pathologists listening, this is the point I want to make about these inclusive preschool settings because you may not all be in a preschool setting, but if you're working in a school, if you're working in an outpatient clinic, pairing those kids can make a huge, huge difference. I know in my personal caseload where I'm working right now, I am very conscientious of pairing some of my lower social kids with kids who are very outgoing and very social and can bring them out. And it makes a huge difference. So when you're pairing your kids up for speech therapy, I know it's, we've got to try to work on as much as we can. And, if we've got all the R kids in one group and all the L kids in one group and all our language kids, but really take a look at that and see if there's something that you can do as a speech pathologist to bring some more inclusion into your settings that they can help their peers with. Because for Mary, I know she's going to tell a story later on about who helped her learn how to walk. So it's amazing. Um, w- what has been the biggest transition so far? We're going really long, so I'm going to
No,
try to
no,
get.
okay, I will say the biggest transition for us, elementary school was great, middle school was great. We also had a intermediate school. She was very much part of the classroom. She would
Mhm.
get pulled out with some other friends for some special, you know,
Yeah, that RSP
modified work.
support. That's RSP special
But it
education
was,
support,
yeah, it was great. But then
and
when she went to
she also received speech therapy all those years,
right.
right?
Now, when
Okay,
she went to ninth grade, that's when things changed. That's when things start counting as far as your grades. And that's when you start getting chemistry and biology and blah, 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 and she just could not do that classroom work, even a modified classroom. So she would come home in tears every day. And we sat down with teachers, had an IEP meeting, and they said they felt like she belonged in special ed in the contained classroom. Well, the contained classroom was not for her. I mean, it was. So for 4 years, I think it really pulled her back instead of forward. And, she started doing speaking engagements. So her speech therapy turned into more, you got to a point where which, by the way, if they don't know yet, Michelle moved from, well,
early intervention to the school district. So
and that
I worked with Mary when she was in early intervention, and then, of course, we remained friends. We lived in the same community, not 5 minutes from each other. So, and Mia and Mary were friends, went to birthday parties, and did all the things together in the community. But then when Mary got into high school, I was working at her high school, and I was also her speech pathologist when she was in high school. And when you guys meet Mary later on, you're going to hear that she does still have some speech sound errors, but her speech is still clear. And so targeting those sounds at that high school level was just not appropriate. But like Jana, you just said, that's when she started those speaking engagements. So how did I know everybody says, oh, well, her mom does PR, you do public relations. So you must be out there, trying to get her gigs or whatever. But that's
trying
not
to
the
get how
case
many
at
can we
all.
not have? Well, she speaks one place. Well, we'll tell you, I have my sister who passed away several years ago. She was a special ed teacher at UNA. She had her PhD in special ed,
Mhm.
and she asked me to come speak to her classroom for the students that were not going to be special ed teachers, that were going to be typical classroom teachers, PE teachers, science teachers, whatever. But they're going to have kids with special needs in their class at some point.
Right.
So they wanted different parents with different perspectives. And they wanted somebody who had a parent, IEP and a 50, what was it, 504? Because
504.
Ben had
Mhm.
a 504 for diabetes. So I went and I'm talking to the classroom, telling them what I expect. And they had Mary kind of walk around campus. I think she was like 12 or 13 at the time. And when she came back, my sister said, well, Mary, does anybody have questions for her? And she just got up and started like, and they loved her. And then she started doing these videos. Her track coach she was doing track and field with Lakeshore Foundation, which is a Paralympic training site. So these are kids who have disabilities. And they asked her to do a video and they wanted her to start it. And she did. And it's about the top 10 ways to communicate with a person with a disability, which you ought to
Right.
put a link on there for that one because that's such a good video.
We will definitely put a
Because
link
it's
on
like,
there for
"Say it
that
to
one.
me, don't say it to my parent." And she also at one point says, "Come here. I'm not sick.
It's not
I'm
contagious,
not
right?
contagious,"
I remember that one.
So I think those are really so that's how it all started. So once she did that first video, then someone asked her to speak at it was an ability day at River Chase Elementary, I think was the first one, but
Mhm.
somebody would see her, then they ask. Then somebody else would see her, then they call and ask. I swear last week I got 4 phone calls for different
Speaking engagements.
things for her to do.
And just so our listeners know, Mary's not just talking to classrooms, and she's not just talking to churches, and she's not just talking. Mary is going down to the state capitol in Montgomery, Alabama, and she is speaking to congressmen. Mary is speaking to CEOs of companies about why it's important to hire individuals with disabilities.
Mhm.
And so she is speaking to big groups that really have an impact on our community of individuals that have disabilities. And I think that her advocacy in that area is just it's amazing. And
Well, and you will hear about her. I'll let Mary tell you about the fact that they did tell her when she went to special ed, she was not on a college path, is what
yeah,
they said. So
that was my next question. So
we'll let Mary talk about the college part. I will say, as a parent, it was hard, but I don't think it was that different than my other boys going off to school. Or
because you had one that flew out to California and was like, "Hey, I'm going to school in California."
I know. So really, it was 2 hours away. I mean, of course, I was concerned, but I just felt like she was in such a good place. And she would go to camp every summer for a week at a time. And I
Oh,
think
Camp Winnetasco. We're going to have to talk. I don't think we mentioned that, but we're going to have to. I'm
you may
so
have to
glad
mention
that you said that. We're going to have to talk about
yeah.
Winnetasco.
But that helped her. I felt okay because I had her. Because some parents will not let their kids. We have one child, she's an adult now, that would never let their daughter spend the night with us because she never spent the night outside of her house. And the mom said, I invited her to a college, one of these, programs where you go look at the different programs, and she wouldn't even consider it. And her daughter could have gone. But that transition was not as hard as I thought it would be.
Right. And I'm a mom. I sent my daughter off to college, my only child, and I know how hard that is. But for you, knowing that Mary has these medical needs, that had to be even more scary for you because what if she has an issue with her shunt and she has to be brought back, which I know she did and had to be brought back for additional surgeries. But we're going to let Mary talk about that. Gosh, Jana, I just think that your story is so fascinating. And I think what I want our speech pathologists that are listening to take away is that you can't take a family or a child that you're working with in early intervention and think, okay, this is going to be what it's like forever. Because when I was working with Mary in early intervention, she was just learning to walk. She had not fully learned to communicate verbally yet. So we were navigating a lot of different things. But when you guys meet her shortly, you're going to see the impact that speech pathologists have on our families. Just like Jana said earlier, she's learned so much from her team of therapists that she's had, but also on the kids that we have. And we can't just look at the beginning and where we're starting and knowing that there's going to be challenges and think that those challenges can't be overcome. So Jana, I always ask my guests this. As a parent, I'm gonna ask you too, and I think I sent you these. As a parent of a child with disabilities, what advice do you have for parents who may have just been diagnosed with hydrocephalus or cerebral palsy or autism? What advice do you have for them?
Well, I think two things. First of all, don't give up on, don't limit what they can do. Don't just decide, well, this child can do it, so my child can't do it. Just have realistic expectations. At one point, Mary wanted to be a nurse, and she kept saying she wanted to be a nurse. But then we had to figure out, chemistry is not going to work for her.
Right.
So how can she work in a hospital but not be a nurse? So she kept that she wanted to work at a hospital, but we had to take some of that off the table. But the biggest advice I would get is talk to other parents. As much as you guys are amazing, and I learned so much from therapists and doctors and nurses, but I think some of the best advice and the best day-to-day things I learned were from other parents. So I would say get involved in some of the support groups if they're in your area. Reach out and find them because they are there. And if they're not there, start one.
Yeah, I love that. All right. As a parent of a child with disabilities who has received speech therapy from probably 18 months until she graduated high school, what advice do you have for speech pathologists?
Oh, I think you're already doing this, is that have high expectations. And I think that every therapist I worked with had probably higher expectations than I did. So I think and encourage the parents too, give them the positive. And that's what they did for me. So I don't think I can't think of any words of wisdom that you guys aren't already doing, or at least that all the therapists that I worked with aren't already doing.
I love it. Jana, gosh, thank you so much for sharing your story. Thank you for taking time out of your busy day. And if you guys enjoyed this podcast, you can find us over on TikTok. I'm sure we're going to have lots of great little snippets. So, Jana, if you're not on TikTok, you need to get on TikTok. But you guys have a great day, and we will talk to y'all soon. Thank you for tuning in to SLP Full Disclosure. You can learn more about this episode and our show on our website at amnhealthcare.com. If you enjoyed this episode, share it with a friend and subscribe to our show on your favorite podcast platform. You can also find show updates and SLP opportunities on our Instagram at AMN Allied. Special thanks to AMN Healthcare for making this show possible. See y'all next time.